Hello there. So, what's going on, everybody? My name is Connor Kemcal. This is the Sinestra channel, and today's topic is going to be Hema in D&D. I initially got into Hema in 2016. The way I got into Hema was that I wanted to learn how to describe sword combat and just medieval combat in general in Dungeons and Dragons with more realism. So, I fucking found a local group, and I went there. I started practicing, and I've been doing that ever since. I became the head instructor of my club, and today we're going to be, I'm going to be trying to pay this shit forward by telling you guys about a couple of alternative rules and some general guidelines and tips to make your D&D campaign more realistic or Hema authentic. So I'm going to only specifically be talking about Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, alright? That's all I'm going to be talking about. There's a lot of other systems that do fucking, oh god. There's a lot of other systems that do realistic combat a lot better than Dungeons & Dragons specifically. D&D is for a specific type of RPG, and D&D is my favorite system to run. So when you have questions like, well, what about this system, or what about that system? Why don't you talk about these other things, Connor? I might get to them in another video. There's so much fucking content with this, I could do an entire series on it. Yeah, you know, for example, there's systems like Riddle of Steel, written by the illustrious Jake Norwood. It's a really cool system from what I hear. I've only looked at it a touch, but you know, with its dice pools and all that other shit, it seems awesome, and it's like kind of spiritual successor of Song of Swords, which came out not too long ago, which has some pretty dope lore. I'm supposed to be running a game with that system in whenever I get the chance to. Quarantine has been fucking weird, and I've been busy because I work at a hospital. But this video is about Hema in Dungeons & Dragons, not in any of those other systems. So, without further ado, we're going to get into my specific things on how to make your D&D game more Hema realistic, or more Hema focused. Can you give me a scene break? Kid. So, how do we get a more authentic or realistic Hema experience, okay? For historical European martial arts in D&D, I'm going to group this video into 3 separate categories to help us rein this shit in, because it's a lot. First is going to be mechanics, math, or as I like to call it, crouch. 2, we're going to be looking at roleplay and your setting. And 3, we're going to be looking at your players, okay? So, first, mechanics and crunch, okay? 5e is good because of its ease of mechanics. Do not change that. If you want to have a more crunch-heavy game that is more focused on a plethora of rules that cover and encompass a lot of different things, right? You're going to probably want to look at something that's different from Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and you probably are already playing that. I initially got involved in Hema in Pathfinder games, although my first D&D game was a D&D Next playtest. But I ran Pathfinder for years and years and years, and that shit has broken me. I can't do Pathfinder anymore. The reason why we're going to be focusing on 5th edition specifically is because of its ease of rule set, alright? The things that I'm going to be talking about do increase a little bit of the math aspects of things, or the flow of how combat works, with regards to 5th edition's typical way of running combat. What I'm going to talk about is two specific rules that I would like you to look at or possibly include into your game, which I think are a good bar of entry to make your game a little bit more Hema-esque. The first of these rule sets is armor class as damage resistance. So, if we spent any time in kit doing proper Hema sparring or any type of exploration into historical European martial arts, we'll know that armor doesn't necessarily make it a 50-50 situation. You can still get hit, but you won't get necessarily damaged depending on the context of whatever type of weapon your opponent is using, right? If you get hit with a longsword and you're wearing plate, you're probably not going to get as fucking damaged as you would if you're wearing a gambeson or chainmail, whatever other type of armor there possibly could be, right? So, armor class's damage resistance is a really interesting rule set, and it's going to be one that I'm going to be including in my next D&D game. Okay, increase a little bit the amount of math that you have to do. When you're DMing, you will have to front load a little bit of your encounters and the game as a whole just to include this, but I think it's really worth it, and it's not too difficult, right? So, basically what you have to do, okay, is you have to take all of the existing armors that there are, right, your basic armors, and you're going to want to subtract all of those by 10. For example, we're just going to work with plate, okay? So plate armor gives you an AC of 18, okay? So we're going to subtract that by 10, we're going to get 8, okay? After that, we're going to divide that by 2. All right? So which will give us 4, okay? That will be plate armor's DR, or damage resistance. So if I'm playing, you know, fucking level 1 or level 2 rogue, and I roll a hit, right? I hit, I roll, I'm attacking with like a fucking short sword, right? I roll a d6, I get 6. 4 of that damage that I do is going to be automatically reduced to whatever damage my health, my HP will actually take. So you're basically going to be making your armor class into 2 stats. You have your AC, which is the thing that will actually be hit, right? And then your damage reduction after you do get hit, okay? So your AC will go down a bit. It'll be subtracted by the amount of DR that you have. So if we're talking about plate armor, that 4 will be taken out of your armor class, right? So you'll be hitting a 14 as opposed to an 18, which it was before. If we're talking about something that includes a dex bonus, right? So hide armor, for example. Hide armor gives you an AC of 12 plus your max dex mod, right? So hide armor is 12 minus 10, okay, which gives us 2. 2 divided by 2 equals 1. So your damage resistance will be 1, right? Means our new AC will be 11 plus dex modifier and 1 damage resistance. Simple, easy, effective. That's what we're going to want to do as much as possible when we're going to be running a game, right? This will increase the amount of times that something will get hit. So just remember to make sure that if you want to keep an encounter a little bit more threatening, to maybe increase the HP of whatever the players are fighting, okay? Another thing that I would suggest maybe possibly looking into, I'm considering doing this for my next game as well, is adding resistances and vulnerabilities for specific armor types. So we all know that if a person tries to throw a cut into somebody with plate armor, it won't go through the fucking armor, okay? Maybe making armor more resistant to bludgeoning or piercing or slashing damage, depending on whatever the players are using, right? Or making the shit more resistant or vulnerable, depending on whatever kind of armor the enemies or the players are wearing, will increase the kind of puzzly nature of the combat, right? You'll see some people flipping their longswords over and using it with more versatility as a pole hammer, right? You know, using those coolants for the Mordhau or whatever the case may be. The second part of this is going to be called shots or aimed shots, all right? I will be including all of the links to these specific rule sets in the description box, so if you find any of these interesting, please feel free to check them out. You know, when I'm fencing, you know, I sometimes will think about the specific target I want to hit, whether it be hands, legs, head, if I want to get a nice thrust to the torso, whatever the case may be. And called shots is your best way to do that, okay? It really meshes well into our idea of trying to bring more realism into Dungeons & Dragons and bringing Hema into Dungeons & Dragons while keeping things still moving and flowing the way that 5e combat does so well. You know, 5e combat is focused on the action economy as much as possible as opposed. Called shots are, in my opinion, the second pillar that holds up this Hema and D&D thing that we're trying to get going on, okay? With called shots, we have the ability to kind of fight in D&D a lot more accurately to how we fight when we're in full kit, right? The specific texts that we study, they all talk about throwing cuts to the head, throwing cuts to the body, you know, stabbing people in specific ways, cutting off hands and all that jazz, you know, wrestling folks. With called shots, the specific ruling that I found basically goes like this. Whenever our players decide to make a called shot, if I remember correctly, the system turns all attacks into called shots. So if a player doesn't specify, they automatically go for the torso, which makes sense, you know, it's the largest target other than, you know, like a fucking head, I guess. If a player makes a specific target, say, for example, somebody's trying to snipe some hands, you know, we see that all the fucking time. Maybe the enemy that you described has ill-equipped hands, you know, maybe they got just some leather gloves on, or no gloves at all, or they have poor leg defenses, or maybe they just got some dumb hat on their head, and they're trying to aim for that head, right? The first thing you're going to do with any kind of called shot that your player makes is automatically give them disadvantage. They're trying to hit a more difficult target than what we did before, right? When we're just rolling and we're getting that 50-50, either hit or no hit situation going on. When they roll that hit, right, we also add +2 or plus whatever the case may be. The rule set that I'm going to be linking in the description down below gives us a added AC to whatever the target that they're trying to hit is. So, say for example, the person that they're trying to hit is wearing plate armor. So if we're going based off of our armor as DR rule set, they have 14 armor from the get at the start. They're trying to hit a person in the hands. I remember specifically that a hit to the hands incurs a +2 AC, so they have 16 in total. They roll disadvantage. They get that hand hit off, right? What'll happen next is they'll roll damage, and then the hit will incur some type of penalty based off of whether the hit did a certain amount of damage or if it was a crit. Critical hits will incur specific penalties based off of a small little description that the page will show, which I thought was really awesome. We're going to just keep on going with hands for this metaphor. Hands. Say that player gets that critical hit on the hands, right? Possibly that hand gets dismembered, or that hand drops whatever weapon the enemy is holding, or maybe it incurs a disadvantage on whatever kind of attack that enemy is attempting to make. And there's all sorts of these really interesting and fun little rule sets. And the difficulty of the target is scaled up so that, you know, something that's a little bit more of an easy shot, like a hand, will have a lesser bonus to the enemy's AC, whereas something more specific, like, you know, say targeting the side of a person's head, will be like +4 or +6. Another important thing to remember is that our opponents can do the same thing to our players. So we can see like these, if these like more advanced enemies, like say the party is fighting some fencing master from some enemy encampment, or some like mercenary that like the big bad evil guy is hired to besiege the party. If he's like a battle master fighter and he's been trained at a fencing school, or by like some like great fighter, they'll have the ability to target specific areas, and even if the enemy is some like peasant who has a sword, like we were talking about a little bit earlier, he's not going to be as smart with fighting, but he'll probably go for the most easy target. He'll just keep on sniping those hands or those legs or those arms, whatever the case may be. So this will really make combat a lot more interesting and a little bit more deadly for our players on top of that as well, bringing that realism more into Dungeons & Dragons than we just see with our basic game. Part 2, roleplay. So an important thing to remember when we are doing roleplay with these specific rule sets and with trying to bring historical European martial arts into Dungeons & Dragons is that we have to remember that the people at the table we're playing with, unless they're, say, your local club's D&D group, right? They're not going to necessarily know what the specific terms for Hema are. Most of the players that I play with have never picked up a fetter or a sword at all and swung it around, but they might not necessarily know what all the specific terms are. I know that you know, most people don't know what a Shielhau or a Zverhau is, or what the guards are, you know, like the Shingiale or Vamta or Flug or Ox. They're not going to know what those guards and those things are. But with our roleplay, we're able to adequately describe these actions relatively easily, you know. Although it might be easy secondhand for you to fall back on these terms, it's just as easy for you to be like, the enemy raises his arms with his point forward, threatening you in the face, and throws this horizontal cut over top of his head to drive into the opposite side of your head. That's a perfect description of a Zwerhau. You can easily make these things flow and add more descriptive actions into your combat and into the encounter. That'll make things a lot more realistic. It'll add to the I forgot this word. Verisimilitude.
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 M then L. Verisimilitude.
It'll add to the verisimilitude. It'll add to the verisimilitude of your combat encounter. Also, the one thing you're gonna have to tackle is, what are the monsters like in your game too, right? Are there hobgoblins that train in a specific style, right? Maybe all your hobgoblins are furists, and all your bugbears are trained in rapier combat from one specific master, right? We can take the texts and just with like a little bit of reading and a little bit of diving into the sources, we can really add a lot of color to the local areas inside of your game to make things seem more realistic. We can make different areas fight different ways, right? Maybe you have a section that's Little Italy and everybody there is rocking side swords and rapiers. And maybe another area is like, like early 16th century Germany, and they don't allow people to thrust each other if they're from the same area, but they can thrust people from other places. And that'll reflect and allow flavor to really saturate into the rest of your setting. Last but certainly not least is for the players, right? What can you do as a player to make your game, or at least your local group, a little bit more focused into Hema? Oh, look at this beautiful boy. This is my executive producer. His name is Calcifer. Calcifer Julius. Okay, so as a player, what can you do to bring Hema into your game if you're not getting that itch scratched in your current campaign? Okay, the first thing I'm going to recommend to you is to play a Battle Master Fighter. Okay, the Battle Master Fighter is the closest thing that we have in vanilla D&D to these additional rule sets that I talked about earlier on in this video. You'll get specific things like trip attacks, disarms, other kinds of special actions that you can do in combat to incur different types of penalties and aid your allies and your other players in combat, and it'll really allow that Hema flavor to soak in, along with the rest of the things that we already talked about earlier on in the video. This makes just like the perfect combo to make that fighter really, really pop. Now, like I said earlier, if you're a player that does Hema and the rest of your group doesn't, just make sure that you're making things a little bit more easier for lay people to understand. Make sure that your descriptions of your actions aren't like, I go into Finestra and I do a Scrambiar de Punta against my opponent. Make them like, I bring my hands upward, I drive my sword back with my point online, threatening my opponent. And as he tries to attack me, I take a passing step, and I bring my sword down and I drive the thrust into his throat, whatever the case may be. Or if you're doing a disarm, you throw a cut in and you drive your opponent high. If you succeed in the grapple check, you bring your hilt up and around the opponent's sword and you flip his sword far and away from him, or just drop it on the ground like the rules say. But flavor, you have all of these tools at your fingertips, and if you really search through the texts and find the descriptions and actions that you want your character to do, they'll readily and easily be there for you. All in all, I think that covers all of the basis of the things that I wanted to talk about for this video. Please let me know in the comments if there are any kind of areas that you would like me to expound upon more. I'd be more than happy to go over those with you. If this is something that you would like to see more of, please let me know by telling me in the comments and liking the video. I would like to do another series I'd like to do another series on D&D specifically And I might just be streaming one of my upcoming campaigns that has all of these rules that we talked about baked into it. And I would also like to go into Magic a little bit and how to make Magic in a more realistic or low fantasy setting more interesting for your game. So, all in all, my name's Connor. This has been the Sinestro channel, and I'll see you next time.